Welcome to the IdeaGen Global Partnership Summit live at the Harvard Club of New York on the sidelines of UNGA and Climate Week. I am deeply honored to have with me today Mark Fitzgerald from KPMG. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. And Mani Dasgupta from IBM. Again, incredibly honored to have you here with us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
You know, both of these folks have a storied career, and I could go on and on about their careers, but I'd like to start by asking Mark and Mani, tell us a little bit about where you've come from and where you're going. How have you landed here,
Please.
In this case at IBM?
Great, happy to. So I'm VP of Advisory Partnerships at IBM. I manage our 360 relationship with the big four strategy, consulting, tax and audit firms globally. It's very exciting when you're doing sell to, when you're doing sell through, it's mundane. But when you do sell with, which is truly partnering and getting beyond the rivalries and getting into a fluid, open ecosystem approach, I think that's very rewarding and exciting to be working on this one with Mark.
Thank you. Mark Fitzgerald. I'm the global lead partner for KPMG to the United Nations, hence my focus on UNGA Week and right throughout the year. I also work with all the development banks, the World Bank being the biggest and prominent one. I also lead all our nonprofit practices around the world. So my focus within the firm is always purpose-led, not profit-led. And the only way we can do that is attach ourselves to the mission, to those purpose-led objectives of our clients, and do so in partnerships with entities and companies like IBM.
Fantastic. And so inspiring to hear about your backgrounds and what you're doing and certainly your purviews. Now, what is it that's happening between this partnership with KPMG and IBM? What is it that makes it so powerful?
You know, we both are 100 plus years. You're probably 150.
150 years?
150
125.
Years, 125,
Yeah.
110 plus. And so,
Wow.
between the two companies, there's a long legacy of trusted relationships with our clients. We are very complementary. So the good thing is the similarities on the trust, the brand that both of the companies command with our clients. But there are complementary capabilities. IBM's technology, IBM's research, KPMG's audit, tax, the regulatory reporting, understanding the dynamics behind the companies, and IBM's platform engineering kind of come together, then it's magic. So if you see, it's like end to end, and I'm sure Mark is going to talk a little bit more about that, but if we can truly understand the dynamics of a large global organization, what goes into it from a process standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, and advise it on how to work better, smarter, with technology, less footprint on the environment, figuring out how to do more with less, and lead to profits, it's a win-win-win for all.
That was pitch perfect, so I'm not going to repeat that. Let me zoom out, though, and put things into context for this week. George, you've already mentioned there's about 700 plus events around UNGA. We've got Summit of the Future. We've got the World Economic Forum here. We have Goals House. We have Climate Week. There's a variety of things all happening in New York this week. But I want to pick up on a couple of key themes that I have kind of heard myself that will really tie in what we've just heard in terms of how our two companies work with each other. So if you take SDG 17, which literally is focused on partnerships, there are two elements within SDG 17, data and technology. There are many others, but I want to highlight on those two first. One of the key themes this week is all about the impact, maybe good, maybe not, maybe perilous, maybe not, around AI. This is clearly an area that KPMG and IBM work closely on. We're both heavily invested, as indeed most companies of our nature are. The issue that I'm picking up, though, as a theme this week is not so much trying to create barriers for what it could potentially do as a peril, but how do we create an opportunity whilst also concurrently dealing with those clear issues? A couple of issues that we have to be very clear about. One, AI will only really present the rewards and the positivity and benefits if you have data to use of scale. To create that data at scale, you're going to create a carbon footprint that is multiples of what we see today. So you cannot create the data centers without also having a concurrent conversation around generation of electricity. Mm-hmm. So we should just put that out there and be pragmatic. It's not one or the other, it's both at the same time. So where we can come in is advise our clients, and very often our clients both identify as an energy company or a data center company, and how they use tools like Watson, et cetera, to make that a more efficient proposition, how you look at it in terms of the baseline insights that you can provide, in my case, to governments. Mm-hmm. That's where you can start to generate the power of AI. That's what I'm hearing mostly from world leaders this week. So you've got to have both. You can't just sugarcoat the positivity without understanding the challenges.
Yeah. And just to give an example of how it could be done, which is a very pragmatic, simple to understand for everybody. So you talked about data centers. The amount of power that is consumed by our data centers is just enormous, right? And everybody says, hey, go to cloud. The cloud runs on someone's data center somewhere, right? So now you're looking at all of this technology and infrastructure and the things that are required to keep it running. There are stuff that doesn't need to run at all points of time. IBM has a software called Turbonomic that can go in and find these zombie servers that don't need to be running and shut them off. How simple is that to just switch it off and save some power, right? So very simple, very pragmatic, but technology can actually overcome a lot of the challenges that companies are facing and save them some money in the end of the, you're saving power, you're saving money, it's a win-win.
So you're going to have practical solutions like that to generate the power, create the data, then you put the tools on top to get the insights. Let me give you a quick example of something that kind of really was noteworthy. I was at an event yesterday and the New York Commissioner for Health was presenting. And he said, a child today who was born in the Upper East Side has a life expectancy of 11 years more than fill in the blank. You're probably going to go to an emerging market. No, Brownsville in New York City. 11-year gap today. So his premise was, how can we create more timely, more targeted insights using AI in a way that will promote the partnership of all the actors, in this case healthcare, to work better so they use more of what they have in a more efficient way. So most of our clients reflect that. So they come to us to be able to provide those basic insights to start with, but then the use of those insights become the critical output, and that's where we partner together. At the moment, we have about 300 projects active in 24 countries across all sectors.
Wow, 300 plus projects. That's incredible. You hit on a personal issue that I like to talk about with colleagues, friends, which is what you just alluded to, which is how can one person in a zip code, literally right next to you, have such a different life expectancy. Mm-hmm. And if you're all working to solve toward that, and AI can help or whatever, it's a huge way for us to move forward to change the world, right? I mean, that's a massive, when you think about 11 years, just to use that example, it's startling, I think, for everyone that's either watching this program on TV or in person, to think about the direct disparities right there. And it's just the luck of the draw. You were born in that zip code, so maybe you won't have access to the resources that the person in the other zip code now has, or area.
We have a common client in that industry, in that sector, and through the use of AI, we've identified that those impacts in terms of somebody's health is 80% influenced by their environment and social kind of surrounding and background. Only 10 to 20% is impacted by their access to healthcare services.
Wow.
Which is quite startling. You would think it would be the other way around.
Sure.
And that's in a US context. Never mind when you go into emerging markets. So that's what we work on together in terms of how we complement each other in terms of social issues, sustainability issues, and then obviously related to each individual sector.
Technology is a great leveler. It brings, and I have a 15-year-old back home, and I tell her this: it doesn't matter how tall you are, how strong you are, what you have in terms of technology or machines. You know, even if you go back one level down, in empowering you beyond what you can do today is just huge. And so use technology, use it to the right benefit, and use it to take these disparities out. If you think of how the headwinds that we are seeing today, I mean, look at the geopolitical issues, look at the inflation, the rise in inflation, and companies like ours, which are public companies, are expected to perform in the market every single day. This is the last week of September, it's quarter close for us, right? And so that's top of mind for me right now. And I'm thinking, how can we use technology to work better, work smarter, and to make the lives of people better?
Moving on, I think the other thing that we connect with a lot is that we have common teams doing common projects. And I think everyone has noted this this last couple of weeks. Amazon, for example, have now mandated go back 5 days a week into the office, I think, from the 1st of January. We've just launched, and IBM were part of this survey, a CEO Outlook that we've run since 2015. And part of that, there was 5 top themes that came through. One of them was around talent and future of work. And this is where we collaborate a lot because we see it in our own workforces. We have 270,000 people. There are multiple hundreds of thousands as well all around the world. What is the best answer, not only for our own people, but for our clients using technology? And this is where there has been a bit of caution about the impact of AI. But interestingly, CEOs have said about 70% of them do not feel it's going to lead to redundancies. 92% of CEOs feel they're going to actually increase their workforce in the next 3 years.
Wow.
So that kind of jars against what we're hearing in the public domain. But when you look at the detail, it's about the skill and the competency and the focus of that workforce. That's where it gets into the nuance. But it's a changing and dynamic area. We feel it ourselves with our own teams, but the answer is in there. We just haven't teased it out exactly yet.
Well, and I think that's where this partnership is. So I want to applaud you both for being able to describe the intersect of where you all are making a difference. And then for me, that, I mean, it's beyond enlightening to think about the implications of that, not only for your workforce respectively, but also for the communities where you actually are having that giant, impact across the world. And that's what this is as well. This is a global partnership.
It is.
This isn't a local partnership. This is the example. And what I also find, really just fascinating is the brands, that reputational element here, where it's like, okay, IBM's been around for how many years again? 150 or so. And KPMG, you've got centuries of experience and trust that have been built up over time. And I think you can only change the world, whether it's me and one other person or me and an organization, if there is trust. That's the essential element to this. And how do you build trust? Do you build it online? Or do you build it by doing what we're doing today, by having a conversation?
Let me give you a quick example. And I got to focus on the UN, given the week that we're in. If you are a UN entity that is responsible for responding to humanitarian disasters, for example, one, you need to know where the disaster happened, but you also need to know what population was impacted. 5 years ago, we would not have been able to look at a data set and be fully accurate around the displacement of people in a certain location day by day by day. We can do that now. Wow. Obviously, there's pictures coming down from satellites every day, and those are updated daily. But the use of AI, and we have a common client that does this, looks at the analytics of that data and looks at what maybe the land registry say there are 10,000 people in this location, but when you look at the picture and you apply generative AI on top, there are 25,000 people in that location because they're unsettled or they have temporary accommodation, etc. So that's your real answer. If you're a UN agency trying to identify your supply chain and logistics for disaster response, that's where it can be trusted to be more responsive and more accurate. So we give them the insights, they then implement.
And
Human beings are inherently, our base instinct is to trust. When you're sharing something, or you're going to a bank, or you're just withdrawing money from an ATM and you're on the street, our lives are dependent on trust, or the ability to trust. And when we see companies like IBM and KPMG work together, sometimes you may think, oh, is it competitive? It is co-opetition. That is the new.
We're competitive
new term.
people.
We're very, we are profit-making
Fair.
organizations globally. Fair. But there is so much more value to be had if you can just learn to work together, if you can just figure out what's the joint value proposition, where are these complementary capabilities. Of course, we can be adults about it and say, okay, there are a couple of areas where we both would like to work, that's fine. But there are many more areas where we could collaborate to create better value. So to your question around trust, it doesn't get built in the first day, but we'd like to be trusted and trust. And so when you work day to day and when you have the longevity that these two companies have of having the experience of working together, it builds trust and it strengthens the foundations even more. So that to us has been like, it's a day to day, it's a marriage. You've got to wake up and make it work every single day.
So I heard a nice quote the other day that for us to achieve progression with the SDGs, we have to have a bias towards optimism. And I feel that in our collaboration, our partnership, the opposite is, of course, having a bias to putting up barriers, being risk averse to a point where you do not do anything.
right.
And that's the last theme I would probably highlight that I've heard this week is, yes, there are so many significant challenges right across the globe, across all sectors that are impacting all individuals. We know that. Give us the solutions. How are we going to make some progress to mitigate those issues going forward? And that's why partnerships are so strong, so powerful, and so needed right across the spectrum of collaboration.
Well, let me remind everyone that the United Nations came together in 2015 and unanimously agreed to these 17 global goals. They've now agreed to the Pact for the Future. It's a step toward the future goals, whatever those are going to look like.
Yeah.
And there's optimism. And I think what you came up with, Mark, what you've just coined, which is your euphemism for changing the world, a bias towards changing the world, ultimately, right? A bias toward optimism. And this is what this partnership is. And so is there an example of a partnership that's gone beyond your partnership? In other words, something that's emanated out of it that you could highlight? I know, Mani, you work with this every day, but there's so many, 300 plus. But
there are many. So I'll give you some examples to help illustrate the point. When we work together, what we have seen is often we are able to say a new product is being launched by a client in the market. It could be a consumer goods product. It could be a banking and financial services kind of an institution that is reaching out to consumers daily. When companies like ours work together, we are able to decrease the time to market for that particular successful product launch sometimes. We are able to de-risk the transformation journey.
Right.
So many a times you have a strategy and you think about it, you put it on PowerPoint, and then when you have the technology implementation, there is a big chasm between the two, right. And often your vision doesn't really get translated into a day-to-day outcomes, a day-to-day how you're working. That is what this kind of a partnership solves, the translation between your strategy to action, to how quickly you can get to your consumers, and to how quickly you can realize that bottom line impact is what our partnership is able to do. So we talked a little bit about sustainability. There are many projects that we are working around trusted AI, around AI governance. Again, when you talk about AI, like Mark talked about, there are some risks to it, but there are ways to mitigate those risks, right? So if your AI wants to solve every problem in the world in one software, it is usually, pretty risky given, gives into hallucinations and things like that. However, if your models are trained for a particular business outcome, they are pre-trained, the parameters that you're feeding into the models are actually towards writing code or, making your supply chains run better. So when you do that kind of training, it is much more accurate, it is way more impactful, and it's way faster. So I think those are the things that we're working on, identifying how can you make the technology work better for you, and how can it in turn impact the company's bottom line and top line growth.
Incredible. And that's optimism right there. Mark, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing. You mentioned a little bit about the UN, but specifically in your work with the UN, what other optimistic elements can you share with us today for what we're seeing here in New York during Unga and Climate Week?
I'd highlight two. The Summit of the Future is really bringing together all different stakeholders to understand what could the role of the UN be going forward. Some may call it reform, some may call it just a reflection point, but ultimately, if the UN didn't exist, we would invent it. We need to have a way to broadcast, to discuss the issues of common interest, and be able to do so in a way that doesn't judge, as we would see as prevalently so at the domestic level. It's not without judgment. I'm not that naive, but there has to be some way to present a global issue. Related to that, and what really started to become apparent in the 2015 goals, was the involvement of the private sector. We're not the answer for everything, but you have to involve the private sector to get to the scale and the urgency and the pace to deal with the challenges that are already self-identifiable. That is going to accelerate even more than it ever has before. So I'm optimistic about that engagement. I'm very optimistic that the private sector are now leaning in a way that we have not seen in the past. And there's trust there now. I could not have said the same 20 years ago with the MDGs. There's always actors that you could say could be a little better in their behavior. But generally, I think the collaboration is a really solid basis for optimism.
Fantastic. That's incredible perspective. So we're optimistic.
We are.
And leaning in on optimism to close, I'd like to ask you a question that we always like to ask, which is, your current global leaders, you're functioning at the highest level of your companies. What advice do you have that you can share to future global leaders? It's relevant right now, right here on the sidelines of Unga. What's that advice? AI's coming at us. You're a student. You're young. You're trying to look at the future. You're being told, who knows what your job is going to be? What's your takeaway from this in terms of advice?
I could give you the coined answer, which is very highbrow and very high level, but I'm not going to do that.
Thank you.
Because I always come back to the individual. What would the individual do if a circumstance was presented to him or her? And I think about the people who work for us right around the world. We have 140 different member firms around the world. I've mentioned to you before, George, that the SDGs to me are like a code of ethics for humanity. So let's have a bit more humanity at the individual level. And if you do that enough, it will have the same humanity and human dignity at the national and then the global level on any issue. I know that's a kind of a pipe dream, but I truly believe that the individual is much stronger than they believe they are. Mm-hmm. I think there's a bit of feeling that they're disenfranchised.
Sure.
I am optimistic that we can change that.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And Mani?
Yeah, I think this is a curious time in the history where businesses are showing the things that are possible to people. So my advice would be, from what we have learned over our years of collaboration and now working globally across this, if partnerships are more valuable than they are hard. If there is so much difference and people are so divided today, we can't seem to agree on ideologies, we can't seem to agree on the vision for future, we can't seem to agree on anything, and we kind of try to stick to what we know is true without really learning what is happening on the other side. And if anything, what our partnership has taught us, which I'd like to share with our global community, is that be open and receptive to hearing what the other person has to say. And more often than not, you will find areas which are complementary. More often than not, you will find areas which can create more value than you would have alone. So work together, find those partnerships would be my message.
Well, that closes our interview with inspiring insights and perspectives. Mark Fitzgerald, KPMG, great friend and leader, global leader, changing the world. And Mani Dasgupta, IBM, also global leader, changing the world. Thank you so very much to both of you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.